So without further ado, I am honored to introduce you to our two panelists and our facilitator tonight. Our first panelist is Natalia Brown. Talia Brown. Talia is the Chief Operating Officer at National Debt Relief in New York City. She's been with National Debt Relief since 2010 and has been the Chief Operating Officer since 2019. I won't go through Talia and Finale and Anita's bios in depth. You can go on our website and see the details of their work experience and their charitable experience. But I do like to touch on each of our speakers and the amount that they give back to their communities. So Talia has a wonderful experience volunteering at New Women New Yorkers, which is a nonprofit that focuses on supporting immigrant women in New York. She sits on the advisory board of 4 Steps Forward, a program that aims to financially educate 1 million Black women over the next 5 years, founded by the American College of Financial Services as well. So Talia, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Our next distinguished panelist is our very own Finale Johnson Norton. Many of you have seen Finale on our speaker series events, as she is a board member of CommonBondz. Finale has had a wonderfully successful career at Bank of America for 27 years, retired back in 2017, I believe, and joined Accenture for a year, and then started 2 sole proprietorship businesses, Common Sense Consulting and Rich Girl, Poor Girl. And Rich Girl, Poor Girl is an interior decorating home business focused on sharing interior decorating with those less likely to have an experience with a design firm. It's a wonderful, wonderful cause. I did want to mention something from Finale's bio that I thought was a wonderful, the wonderful passion that Finale has. And what it says at the end of her bio is, though Finale did okay by her standards in corporate America, she says she found incredible courage after the death of George Floyd to reassess her 26-year career. She says she has found the courage to speak out honestly on LinkedIn, to say what others will not, and give voice to those who may not yet have the courage to speak their truth. And her quote was, "I'm just getting wound up," she says. "I have a lot lived and packed in those 26 years. I'm really pleased at that point when I saw her being active on LinkedIn is when I reached out and said, join our board. And she's so wound up and wants to share. As many of you know, Finale's new professional interest is she is a candidate for the House of Delegates in Virginia, District 100. She's a Democratic candidate. The election is next Tuesday, so we're rooting hard for her to win and become a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. So Finale, thank you for taking time from your busy schedule and joining us. We really appreciate it. And finally, I'm honored that our facilitator tonight is Anita Roberson. Anita Roberson is the leader of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice at Gwynedd Mercy Academy High School in the greater Philadelphia area. I have the privilege of working very closely with Anita as being a board member at Gwynedd, as well as having my 2 daughters be graduates from there. And she has done just a remarkable job of introducing diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice and the various activities that the school is doing, and really helping 400 plus young ladies turn into future leaders and their ability to manage and participate greatly in running a diverse organizations and diverse environments. Anita, one of the things that's really wonderful as well is Anita founded a college preparatory elementary school for economically disadvantaged students shortly after transitioning from careers in corporate human resources and workforce development when she moved into not-for-profit and into education. So Anita is also a graduate of Cornell's esteemed School of Industrial and Labor Relations. So thank you so much, each of you, for joining us. And without further ado, Anita, I'm going to turn it over to you to start our discussion.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I am just super excited to be here with 2 phenomenal women of color who are doing amazing things. And I just want to thank all of you who are joining us today for this important conversation. Feel free as we are going through our chat, because we really are trying to keep it conversational and want to bring as much information to you as you need. So feel free to use the chat feature to pop any questions, and we'll try to go back and forth between questions and some of the comments that we would like to share with you as well. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Now, I know when Mike was going through our backgrounds, one of the things that I know just from reading the bios is that we all started off in financial services, which I thought was really interesting. I started off in corporate HR at a legacy JP Morgan Chase company. We have Talia at National Debt Relief. We have Finale in her career at Bank of America. And it just had me thinking a little bit, because I remember my career progression went really quickly, and looking at your trajectories, it went pretty quickly. So it just had me wondering if perhaps there is some kind of connection in terms of our ability as Black women to be successful within financial services industry specifically. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but Talia, what do you think in terms of that? Do you think that's a coincidence or something there?
We noodled on this for a little bit, and I'm still not really sure, but I do think that there's a connection between what we were told as we were growing up. So when I was growing up, what was a good job was a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, those types of jobs. And then when it got to be when I was a little bit older, it was, well, school to be a doctor and a lawyer. It wasn't really in my sights. And accountant seemed the most reasonable and most predictable. So I think for a lot of us, it's not so much about finance, but it's about the most practical job makes sense for us to get, right? So whether that's nurse for some of us, or get a city job, or if it's be an accountant, that's kind of where we branch off. So I think the commonality is more in what's been instilled in us as far as what we're capable of and what's more likely for us to happen as a whole, versus going out and being an engineer per se, right? Where the boys in my family might be told to be an engineer, but not so much me. So I think that's really where the commonality might be, is what we're told growing up and what we think is reasonable and practical for us to do.
Yeah. Are you a first generation college student?
I am a first generation college and first generation American. My mother came here when I was 14 years old. So there was a lot that just navigating college and things, that wasn't something that we were well versed in. Growing up. So it was really, when you come to America, there's this American dream, right? Yeah. And again, it comes back to be a doctor, be a lawyer, be one of these things that's very common that you see in media, right? When you're outside of the country. So that's really what my trajectory was.
Yeah, absolutely. But now, what are your thoughts in terms of that?
Well, what I think is that financial services sort of changed, and it changed about the time that I came into it. And what I mean by that is, it became retail oriented, where there was so many pathways when you went into financial services. So you could do many, many things. I think ultimately when people, they think about tele or running a branch, but then it's so much bigger than that. So I think that financial services just sort of opened up when retail became this really giant, big thing. And there became so many avenues and so much space for people to move based on where their strengths were inside financial services. So I think it just opened up for us and became a much wider place for opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely see that. And then I'm also thinking back to what Talia was just talking about in terms of the stability and kind of our need as women of color, specifically to kind of find those careers where we can have a little bit of stability, or those organizations that are around for a while. But I also know that part of that success also means being able to find people within those organizations that can support us, right? And can help hold us down or show us the way to navigate those waters. And so it makes me think a little bit about the importance of mentorship, which is something that we often talk about, but then also this concept of sponsorship. So for now, can you help us maybe understand a little bit the distinction between, what's a mentor and what's a sponsor, and kind of how those relationships impacted you as you navigated financial services?
Sure. So when I was in financial services, I had a lot of mentors. And that is from the very beginning. So I can remember very fondly my experiences in the branches, and I had mentors, and that was people that I could look to give me advice and counsel and guidance. And then that helps you certainly along the way. But as you begin to move up the ladder, mentors are still great and you will still need them, but you will need sponsors. And the difference between a mentor and a sponsor is the person who puts himself out there for you. So that means when it's time for an opportunity, they are willing to put themselves on the line and say, this is the person who is right for this role. You should hire this person for this role. I'm willing to put my stamp on it. And that's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. That sponsor really helps you ultimately get where you want to go.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that distinction, because I don't know if the term sponsorship is as common. So Talia, in terms of thinking about your career trajectory, you are a COO of a major organization. So that makes me think that perhaps you might have both mentors and sponsors. So do you have a sponsor? And if so, how did you go about identifying who that particular individual is? And feel free to talk about mentors as well.
Sure. So I agree with Finale 100% there. And in fact, I actually have a sponsor on the call right now. I'm going to give a shout out to Britt because he is the reason why I'm even a part of this speaker series, because he was a sponsor for me. He listened to my intentions. And I think that's where you really need to start, is sharing what your intentions are in the world, sharing what your passions are, sharing what you're interested in, what you want to learn. And there are going to be people that are listening to that can put you in touch with someone else or advocate for you whenever there's an opportunity to do so. So I think really I have many sponsors and I've had many mentors. And it started when I started thinking about, well, where do I want to go? I need to start thinking about that and start saying that out loud so that other people can guide me in the right direction. And usually a sponsor is someone, they might not even know they were sponsored. Britt, I have no idea if you knew you were a sponsor or not, but sometimes it's just making that connection. I think there's a distinction. That's not networking. Networking is for the business and sponsorship is for the person, right? When someone takes an interest in you and your interest and puts you in partnership with someone else, that's where it becomes, a beautiful thing where you can be moved along by some people that can sometimes be unexpected, who are just paying attention to kind of what your passions are.
Yeah, I love that definition of sponsorship in terms of it's focusing on you as the person, right? Versus the navigating the business side of things, so to speak. But since we are very intentionally talking to Black women, right? And that intersection of our identities and the things that are unique for us, right? As we are navigating through this world, it makes me think a little bit, to what degree, when we think about that intersection, does the race of the mentor or the gender of the sponsor, does that play a role in any way? And do we need to be more strategic because of how we are perceived, right, within the workplace in terms of who we are identifying as mentors or sponsors? So for now, I'm wondering if you have any sense of that as you navigate your career in terms of, to what degree did that matter for you as a Black woman?
Well, I will tell you, for every single person, it's going to be different based on their abilities. And I think what's most important is, and this is why sponsorship becomes so important, it's not that you actually you can choose your mentors, but you will have a certainly more difficult time choosing a sponsor, because the sponsor typically has to have the confidence in you. It's because they know about your work or they've heard about your work. And they understand the trajectory, whether it's been talent planning or whatever it is. So you don't always get to choose. It's very seldom that you get to choose your sponsor, but they choose you. They have picked you as a person that they're going to help accelerate your career. And so when you get that connection, you better make sure that you open up to the expectations, because that person is actually putting themselves on the line, that you are the person who can deliver the kind of results or deliver what they need. And I also think that what else is important is sometimes you might sponsor a person and they don't do what you thought they were going to do. And it's really risky, because now folks are going to say, well, if this person put themselves out there for this person and they don't live up to the expectation, now what? So you really do have to deliver, but sponsors also have to be willing. I hate to say take a risk, because it feels like that when you are a woman of color or a person of color, it's always a risk. Well, it's never a risk, no more for us than it is for anybody else, because typically you're reaching beyond where you are. So once a person sponsors you, you certainly have to keep in touch, but you also need to make sure that your mentors are helping you succeed so that all of us feel like we're getting what we deserve out of that relationship.
Yes. Thank you so much for that distinction. Like I love, and it was kind of reaffirmed in the chat that the sponsors choose you, but you choose the mentor. So Talia, I'm going to ask you, kind of piggybacking off of that statement, as a Black woman, as you were kind of navigating, trying to figure out who your mentors would be, to what degree did you put into your calculations the gender or the race of the individuals that you felt you wanted to select to be your mentors? Was that a consideration or was it not?
It wasn't. Also, I have to say that my first mentor really was my mother and my grandmother, right? It was from the family unit is the first mentor that I got. But in the professional world, I want to say it was more of I came into a relationship and they said, this is your executive coach. And that person eventually became a sponsor as well and became a mentor as well. And then I had the opportunity to choose my own mentor. And I had been with the previous one for some time. And he happened to be a white male. And I learned a lot of things from him. And I think, like Finale said, different people will give you different things. So now I'm currently being mentored by a Black woman who's been through the corporate world and worked in public companies and has a wealth of knowledge, and especially I credit her for raising my emotional intelligence specifically. So she gave me that and understanding my space as a Black woman in corporate America, right? Where a white male might not be able to see certain things or even understand some of my fears and apprehensions and, you know, how the stories I might be telling myself, whether they're true or not, it's how to navigate those things. So you get different things from different people. So I'll say if you can get more than one mentor that has a different way of viewing things than you do, I think that's most beneficial, right? If you already have your way of thinking, you need someone that challenges that. And I think that's really the way to go about finding a mentor. Find someone that will challenge you and has no problem challenging you.
Yeah, I love that. I love the concept of, you know, trying to find someone who can help you kind of have a miracle, meaning, you know, have that shift in perspective or that shift in thinking that is going to help to propel you forward in whatever way possible. Now I do, you know, just I'm thinking a little bit about my experience, and I think I've noticed in reflection that when I was kind of moving up the corporate ladder, so to speak, you know, I often was given those jobs that nobody else really wanted. Like those were kind of my opportunities to step forward, right? Like, you know, I remember being in corporate HR and we had this, you know, manager that was just brutal to work with. And I was the youngest person. I think I was only maybe 4 years out of college. And that's who they assigned me to be the HR business partner to, the most difficult, challenging manager that there was. But if I didn't take advantage of that opportunity, then I would not have had the career progression, right? So we're in this catch-22. And so I remember, you know, I just wonder, I remember when we were talking prior, Natalia, you talked a little bit about how you've had similar experiences where you've had to kind of be that, you know, Mrs. Fix-It to kind of go in and leverage that. So can you talk a little bit more about this phenomenon where we're often assigned these roles and responsibilities that really stretch our level of competency, perhaps, or understanding or awareness in order to move up?
Absolutely. Britt, you laughed. I saw that. Honestly, I wouldn't be in the position that I am in now if I didn't become Mrs. Fix-It in my current position. There were many, I've moved multiple departments, and there were many situations where someone was put in that place before me. I expressed interest in it, didn't get it. That person failed miserably, and then it became, oh, okay, you can give it to Nat. And it's a tricky thing to balance, right? Because like you said, you want the opportunity, you want to show what you have, you want people to see that you have the talent to do it, and it's not a risk to put you in that place. But that was often the perception that I had was, is it too risky to give me this thing because I don't necessarily have the educational background or whatever the reasons were, right? It wasn't always because I was a Black woman, but in my head it was. And you have to get past that and say, okay, I do want to show what I have. But I think where it becomes dangerous is when it's focusing on proving that you have it. It becomes, you know, turns into burnout. There is that perception that, well, she can do it with less money and get it done under budget. Why do we have to give her resources? And that is something that I try to balance and make sure that it's understood that this wasn't a miracle. It was a lot of hard work. It was 60 hours worth of work, and it could have been 40 if it had some resources. So I think that's the balance that you have to play. You want to be seen, and that's often our only opportunity to be seen. And then once that happens, you become this person that just kind of moves around a lot. So it feels good to be counted on, but at the same time, you have to have some balance so that you don't burn yourself out. So I think that's probably the most important. Take the opportunity, but make sure that there's balance within that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like not only do you need to have balance, but it also feels like you need to have courage, right? Like there's this courageous, tenacious spirit that we have to have as we're navigating through these different opportunities or challenges that are placed in front of us, that might be different than what we are seeing other people experience. And for now, that makes me think a little bit about you in so many different ways, the courage piece, because and just understanding your background a little bit, it seems as though you've had to like literally relocate in order to pursue different opportunity, what could be challenging versus just staying in one place, having to relocate, reestablish your life, bounce back and forth for different opportunities. You've had to do that. And you also took on this amazing risk in reading your bio, where you ended up being just a really strong advocate for other people within your organization, specifically people of color, around pay equity, right? Which was an act of courage. And then I think about what you're doing right now, how you're running for a congressional seat against someone who people believe is an incumbent, as you were telling us before, because of the legacy of their dad. And so there's just all these courageous acts. So can you talk a little bit about how you've managed to become courageous in the face of so many different challenges and opportunities, especially as a woman of color?
Sure. So first, I want to just clear up, it's the General Assembly in Virginia, maybe Congress.
Thank you. I'm skipping ahead of myself. I'm projecting.
Yeah, I think that courage is probably one of, it is one of the most serious, it is one of the most important things. And I was just about what Talia was saying about some of my experience moving around on my own usually. But I think also the courage sometimes to say what things really are. And I just wish, and I don't even know where I would end up today had I had more courage back then, like I do today, which is to really decide that when you take on that role, you were talking and you said, Talia, if you said, hey, I did 60 hours, but it would have been 40 had you given me more resources. And so I think that is an opportunity for all of us to take stock in who we are and what's before us, and not to be afraid to say, well, you're asking me to do this with, this number of FTE or this number of people or this amount of resources. And you do know that so-and-so had this many resources. So I just want to understand your reasoning behind that, because I think that you have to call people out, not in a negative way, but just with facts about why you're asking me to do this. Oh, I'm willing to take on this challenge, but clearly you have a perception about how I might be able to do it since you want me to do it with less stuff. And so I think that we just have to get more confident with doing those things and not being intimidated because of who it is that's asking us to do it. That we just think, oh, this is my opportunity, I don't want to mess it up. But no, we are thinking people, we can see what's in front of us, and we have to be courageous enough to point that out so that folks don't really think that we're not as smart as we actually are. So I just think that's an important point to make. Yes, I did a lot of courageous things. One of the ones that I feel most satisfied about was when I did go to Georgia. We did have so many women of color, especially, who were being paid so much less for running way bigger operations. And I got to fix it. And I'm just so proud of that. And that's why I don't give anybody a break. I don't care who you are. If you are in a position to make things right for people, you should make them right. And so I don't care if you are the new CEO or the new head of banking or you know what you're supposed to do. And no one should count any less or think that your responsibility is any less to do right by women, all women, people of color in particular, but just do the right thing for everybody. And nobody gets to walk away from that. And today I'm courageous enough to say it.
Yes. Amen. I love that. I love everything that you just illustrated in terms of just the importance of us using our voice and not being afraid to use our voice. Because I think even just as women, there is this tendency for us to not speak up, and to not think that our voices can be heard, especially since we're bringing oftentimes a lot of trauma into our situation in our workplace in which we've been ignored or we've been discounted, and just remembering the essence of who we are and having the courage to do that. So thank you so much for that, Finale. And speaking of courage, there's this, we've all heard it before, especially those of us who are African American. We've heard our parents talk about that adage of, we have to go into our work environments and be, twice as good. Right. And we have to do twice as much work. And so sometimes I think, too, that trips us up in terms of feeling confident about, kind of calling people on the carpet, because we keep hearing in our minds, we have to be twice as good, twice as good, twice as good. And so, Natalia, I'm going to kind of come back to you and see if you can help us to kind of unpack that a little bit in terms of, how did that adage kind of impact you in terms of, did you feel that pressure to be twice as good? And if so, how did you handle that? Or how did you navigate those expectations? And did you have some of the courage that Finale was just talking about to push back and say no when it was just too much?
How much time do we have? That's a lot of unpacking. It's a lot. But I'll try. We face so many things. I think you hit the nail on the head. Some of it really is the trauma and the things that we tell ourselves. Like it really just is the story that we tell ourselves. And then there's the real experience that kind of sometimes affirms the stories that we're already telling ourselves. We encounter situations, whether it's conscious or unconscious bias, when I'm in a room and people walk to my male colleague and think he's the boss, right? That plays with my mind. And it tells me, am I not good enough? And then I have to kind of slap that thought out of my head, because that's not the reality of the situation. But those are the things that we have to deal with, right? Whether it's media telling us things. When I was growing up, I had learned about the experiments with the dolls, with, which doll is prettier, right? So we have so many of these things that tell us we're not good enough, and subconsciously it eats away, right? So it even goes into the misfix it. You weren't good enough the first time around, or even maybe the second time around, but you can fix the mess the third time around, right? So that all of that kind of plays into it. And I think our environment has a big factor to do with that. I'm now in a very supportive environment where that courage, I have it. I can say it. There's access. There's the ability to go in and say, hey, I don't think this is right. We got to fix this. And that's okay. There are times in my career where I absolutely did not. And I ended up resigning from, I don't want to say who they are, but I resigned from an organization because there was no support. And there was a lot of things going on where I didn't have the courage at the time to say this is wrong. And I think I don't believe that we actually, in reality, have to be better. But I do believe that depending on the environment, we do have that mentality, and that does play a role in what jobs we get and what progression we can get, what sponsors we can get, and what recognition we can get for the things that we do ourselves. So I think if anyone on the call, or share this with whoever, if you have that mindset, I think it's really time to kind of break it apart. It's not true. It's something that is embedded, and it needs to be deconstructed so that we can live our best lives.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead now.
Can I say something? So this is what I think. I think that intuitively, something has to make us stand out, which is, to your point, Talia, it is that mindset that you got to work harder to be better. And whether you know it or not, you probably are, because you just do. It just is, because parents have told you. It just is. And so because of that ism, you work harder, and because you do, you stand out. Whereas somebody else might not have to work nearly as hard. It just looks that way, but they're not, because you can see by their results. And I think that what happens is in organizations where they tend to look at the results, where you have to look at what someone actually did on paper, it takes the subjectivity out of it. And now that the subjectivity is out of it, you can't tell me that I'm not the better performer, because I am, because it's right here on paper. And now you look at how the performance gets there, and then there comes that subjectivity again. So I think that it does matter to a degree that you work harder, because you just do. And then I think, and because of that, you do get noticed. I think, to your point of unpacking, it's going to be a really, really long time before that goes away.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think I love the fact that you bring up the importance of getting things on paper, right? And having that as a way or a means of demonstrating our value. Because I do think there's a lot of subjectivity that happens. I do think there's a lot of unconscious choices that are being made. And when we are able to kind of, show the receipts in terms of our performance and the things that we're capable of doing, that can be helpful. But I'm going to stay with you right there, Finale, for a second, because then there's this flip side of things where, around, assessing our skill sets in general, right? So yes, we have to work twice as hard, but sometimes, it's also equally important to be able to understand, what things we're good at and where we might need to improve and how to do that. So how would you suggest that someone goes about being able to assess those parts of themselves as well, and know when perhaps they're not in the right position to take that step or to have that courage, because they do need some additional skill sets or some additional development?
Yeah, so I think you might be talking about one of the things. I used to mentor a group of associates, and the question when I got the group together, the very first question that I asked them was, "Are you as good as you think you are?" And I think that's really important, because sometimes we do get a big head about the kind of work that we're doing, and then you don't really start to peel it back to figure out where your opportunities might be. And so I think then, as we are doing that work where we think we're working twice as hard, and many times we are, there are times when you need to take a look at it and say, are you really as good as you think you are? And that may come in terms of, that what in terms of the results, and then the how in terms of how you get it. And there are just many kinds of ways to assess that. So I think that part of it is it's always learning, always be open to learning. Never think that you've learned all you need to learn and that you've done all you need to do. There should be a process for every single one of us where we are always working to improve ourselves. And you should always continue to try to see that growth. And it should be in your results, in your work, but it also should be in you. You can see when you're making improvements, and others can see the improvements around you. So I just think we have to always ask ourselves that question. Are you as good as you think you are? And until the day where you don't have to work twice as hard, because it is going to be fundamentally based on your performance only, you'll have to continue to ask yourself that question. And then when you're in a position of power, then you can start to assess people who perhaps they don't have to work twice as hard, but just as hard as everybody else.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love that the humility is also what you're talking about, that ability to be humble and self-reflect and continue to have that growth mindset and know what we need to do. All incredibly important things. And that leads me to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about something. And Natalia, I'm going to come back to you, because I remember when we were talking before, we were talking about how often sometimes our career progression doesn't happen necessarily within the same organization. It's about being open to identify opportunities outside of our organization that can be somewhat of a leap for us, possibly, right? That then leads us to that next opportunity for career growth and progression. But you were sharing some really interesting statistics when we were talking before about how often women, and I'm sure this also deals with women of color, we don't always have that ability to properly assess ourselves in that way, in terms of a transferable skill standpoint. And we don't always know our value and our worth. So can you talk a little bit about some of the studies that you have seen and identified, and what some of your tips or suggestions can be for those who are having that particular problem?
Absolutely. So the article that kind of sparked this conversation is a Harvard Business Review article, and it's why women don't apply for jobs unless they are 100% qualified. And when I read it, light bulbs were going off all over the place, because there's so many jobs that I absolutely passed on because I didn't meet a qualification. I had 9 years experience, not 10 years experience, or whatever it was. And the article went on to state that, men do the exact opposite. They just apply like, oh, that looks interesting, I'll do it. And then they get called in. And, they transfer their skills over, hopefully most of the time. Sometimes that's not always true, but they apply more often, so they have a higher probability of getting the jobs that they want. Whereas women and women of color don't necessarily do that. We're trying to check all the boxes, and we may not be looking for culture. We may not be looking for the, are you going to treat me as an equal employee? We're not necessarily looking for the progression. We're just trying to check the box. And I think that's really important to pay attention to. You can transfer your skills. You can move from operations anywhere, right? If you understand how things work, you can transfer that anywhere. And I think that's a limitation. I don't know where it comes from, but it's something that we're putting on ourselves, whether it's society, what we've been told, whatever it is. But we need to break free of that. And I think that's also where mentorship and sponsorship comes from, to make sure that someone is seeing your ability and taking that out of you and pushing you to do those things that you didn't necessarily have the confidence and Finale's courage to do, right? And sometimes that comes with just more experience and more interaction, but really it's the courage to take a leap. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're not going to get the job. Okay, move on. But I think we need to challenge ourselves and take a little bit more risk. And it's, again, I don't know if it's a risk, but take the chance on yourself to open up more opportunities. And that's something I don't think that we do as often. We should.
Yeah. So we have to constantly navigate that balance of being humble, self-assessing, but then also having the courage to step up and, stretch ourselves and grow ourselves. Finale, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I did. And I wanted to say, for those on the phone who might still be in corporate America and working, is sometimes you get hindered because they have posting processes that stop you. Or, you won't even get an interview because they stop at whatever the skill sets that they're looking for. And I do think that they should push back on that, because what happens is that you might not have every skill set, but there might be competencies that you have to the point of the transferability, but you have potential to learn and do things. So I do think that we'll have to push back a little bit on HR departments who limit the people who are posting for certain roles or looking for certain opportunities. Because if you're ever going to start to allow people to be able to climb this ladder, you've got to start taking the opportunity to at least start talking to them to see what their potential and opportunity is, versus just giving it to a few who might have had the sponsor who pushed them up, but this person may not have had one, but their skills and capabilities will be just as robust as this other person. So I think that especially people of color, you're going to have to push a little bit harder when you're getting knocked down and not given the opportunity to even post for certain opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's such an amazing point, because I think about when I was in corporate HR, a lot of what got in our way, to be honest, was the computer, and what keywords we put in the computer and how that then fed us certain candidates. And so I think you're right about being able to, if you're in corporate America, form those relationships with the HR professionals and being able to sell yourself beyond that so that they know to then go and look for you, because sometimes that ends up being the bottleneck. It's just this computer system or this algorithm instead of the actual person. Can we also, though, talk a little bit about the pay equity piece? And either Natalia or Finale, either of you can certainly jump on that. But I do think we also have this tendency not only to not go for the positions where we definitely have transferable skills, but we also then, once we get them, we don't demand or we don't negotiate, or there's a whole host of things that we don't do that men often do. Natalia, would you like to speak to that first, and then Finale?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've done this, right? I've been told this is what the job pays, and I go, oh, okay, that sounds great, thank you. And then I speak to a male colleague, and they're just like, you just said yes, you could have gotten 10K more, or whatever it was. And I learned that experience the hard way, right? Where in my mind, I, for whatever reason, thought, if I negotiate, I might not get the job, but I really want the job. And I didn't even ask them.
They didn't have to fight because I fought the fight for them, because it was just simply the right thing to do. And we all just hope that we continue to have leaders who do that, who, when you get into a position, that you're not just thinking about yourself, but that this is always something that should be part and parcel. And I just, I always hope that everybody continues to do that. I just, I'm Pollyannish sometimes to think that everybody's going to do the right thing. And I know that doesn't happen, but that's the way that I think about it. And so I have been in an environment where I've gotten promoted to a role, and then by the time I got the salary reports, all the men who worked for me were getting paid more money than me. And And there was always a reason for that. You can wait till your next review, wait till your this or that. And so now I wish someone would try to tell me that. But I will tell you, that's that courage. I did take a job once, and a person, there was 80 cents on the dollar for women. I just said to her, I said, "You're a woman just like I am. You know what the challenges are as it relates to pay. So I'm going to trust that you're going to do the right thing. And so I'm going to need you to go back and see if you can get more money for this role." Because I mean, honestly, just put it on the table. So you might not be that blunt, but I think that we can be. And I think that oftentimes, because we are never in the position where we're talking to someone who looks like us. It's not very often.
Yeah.
And so that makes the situation even more challenging, because because there is this difference. There's this thing. And so you're never having that conversation with someone who's either a man, it's either a woman, or whoever it is, but usually they don't look like you. And so it gives us an extra fence that we have to jump over to get to the place where you're comfortable having that conversation. And that, again, that's where that courage really comes in. And I just can't say to anybody on the phone, everyone on the phone, doesn't matter who you are, you just have to dig for that courage to do the right thing and to get the right thing for yourself. And for people, if they work for you, maybe they don't have to have so much courage because you're going to do the right thing by them.
Yeah, I love that. I love that return to courage, because, so often what keeps us from doing those things is we just really want that job, and we don't want to mess it up, which is kind of what Natalia was also talking about. We also have a great question for you, either Talia or Finale, which is, how do leaders and organizations create an environment that understands the challenges that women and people of color have, that we're discussing right now, right? And how does one go about putting processes in place to address them? And you both, Natalia, you are a senior leader right now within your organization, and Finale, you had that role when you were working within Bank of America. So, what is some advice for those who are listening, who are in those leadership positions, and what can they do to really help more women of color, or more people of color in general, or women in general?
I'm gonna go first for now. You want me to do it? Okay. So for me, one starts with me, right? So it really is, like Finale said, I look at the work. I don't necessarily need to look at the person. I need to know who's producing and what do they bring to the table to make my team successful and a high performing team. And that's the metric, right? And I hold them to that standard and that accountability. To do this in other organizations, it's just that. It's just look at the work and the performance and give people the opportunities to do certain things, have the conversations, become a mentor yourself, put processes in place. Like you said, the keywords in our HR system, are they biased, or should we evaluate that system? Are we actually looking at the right candidate profile? Are we Xing people out because they don't have a master's degree, but someone with a bachelor's degree and 20 years experience might be the better candidate? So it really is taking a look at every single process and system in place and figuring out if bias exists, how do we take the bias out so that everyone can be on the same level playing field and making decisions about things without, and making it transparent, right? And that's the other piece of it, is having the entire organization understand this is the process and here's how we do things. It doesn't need to be secret and behind closed doors, because you're going to have people telling themselves some stories if they don't even know how it works. So I think it's really transparency, and really look at all of your processes and take your bias out as much as possible and include people of color in that, right? You can't have a room of, just a bunch of white men sitting at a table making the decisions to take out bias in an organization. So I think you have to do things like that. Form a focus group. If that's what your senior leadership team is right now, have a focus group, pull people in, ask them questions, and really make sure you're listening without, I think it takes a certain level of emotional intelligence here, because you might be offended by what you hear, but that's not the part that you focus on. It's the information, it's the things that you need to hear to make the changes.
Yeah, I love your comments about transparency and also ensuring that you have people at the table, because I find that a lot of times people are trying to solve these issues around identity, and then they don't think for 1 second to include people with those identities as part of that.
Clients are represented. So first and foremost, it's very, very clear about what good results are, what good results you want to have, and how you want them to be achieved. And then you make sure that you provide the right kind of training in your organization that gives all of the folks the ability to have that. And then I think the other thing is that when you see that your organization is looking one-sided, where you don't have a good representation, it doesn't look like your clientele, that's a real problem.
Yeah.
So you got to go back and you have to address that. So I think that those are sort of the real things. And I think the other thing is, to Talia's point, look at how you're asking for votes. One of the things that I remember very, very vividly with associates that I always talked to and mentored is whenever they didn't get a role that they wanted, or that they really believed that their skill sets propelled them to the highest, to the top of the pack, the question that they always got when they didn't get it was, I need you to be more strategic in your thinking. And someone tell me what the heck that means? More strategic in my thinking? How? Because I don't know how Bill's more strategic, because I'm looking at his results and they're just like mine. But what is demonstrated with this strategic thinking? So I think that when someone sort of throws those kinds of things out at you, then you can say, you know, I really appreciate that. But can you give me an example of where I might have exhibited more strategic thinking so that I can be sure that I am putting that forth in my performance review, and so that I am helping to develop that skill set? And then see what they tell you. So I think that it's about making sure that you do have the courage to ask those questions. And then if really you are missing some strategic development, then help them get the tools that they need, send them to the resources that they need, give them a stretch opportunity that they need, so they can develop that thing, that strategic thing that's holding them back.
Yeah, all very good points. And you know, it's interesting because as you were speaking, Finale, it made me think a little bit about, especially the whole concept of, you know, the strategic thinking piece in that development of some of the dog whistles, because that's kind of what that is. You know, just as we talk about dog whistles in politics, there are certain dog whistles that we get as people of color, as women within the workspace, that are, you know, told to us during our performance evaluations that we know are really based off of, you know, perhaps bias or people's perception about us and not about the actual work, right? And so that makes me think a little bit, Natalia, about the comment you made before about how you had that sponsor that really helped you to develop emotional intelligence. Because I feel like we as Black women, as we're navigating this intersection, there's a certain way in which we're perceived, right? It's not fair. Shouldn't be that way, but sometimes there are ways that we are perceived that then interferes with a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, that interferes with our mobility, our career progression, our ability to get things done. So can you talk a little bit about, like, when we think about emotional intelligence and really maintaining our composure in the face of, like what Finale was just talking about, having to sit across from someone telling you that you're not a strategic thinker enough, and not really being able to clarify that? How do you retain your composure and sense of calm and really develop those skills so that you can continue to you know, make that good fight and move on up? How do we do that?
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I can say I failed at it miserably in the past. I used to work at a toy store, and I quit on the spot because I was just like, I'm just no. And that wasn't the right thing to do, because when the check didn't come in, I was like, well, I could have figured out a different way to make that work. So the reality of the situation is, one, other people's problems are not your problems. And it's an overplayed cliche, but they also don't pay rent to occupy space in your head. So you should not be giving them the right to even get you to a point where you're coming out of yourself emotionally, and then potentially screwing up your own goals because of someone else's perception. And you have to create some boundaries for yourself, right? There are situations where you're going to have a conversation with that person, not when you're angry, but have a conversation with that person about, hey, this is what triggered me. Can we talk about this? And let's ask some questions of each other and find some understanding. And there are going to be other situations where it might be the culture of the organization and no one's listening. And you have to decide that the best thing for you to do is leave, right? So there's varying degrees, but I think really it ultimately takes a lot of work to not respond to things. But I think what brings me back is I have a goal, I have a purpose, and this person can't take me off of that goal and purpose, right? They aren't so important to me that I should not be my true self. And sometimes we get pulled into negativity, or we get pulled into a comment, or we want to get defensive about things. And the reality is, who does that benefit? right? And what is the ultimate goal of things? So I think really just you have to come back to your ultimate goal of what you're trying to accomplish and have that be your grounding and your center, and always come back to that. And there's other techniques like I'm a hothead. Sometimes I have to clench my fist and I just keep it. Or in my head, I'm smiling, but in my head, I'm saying lots and lots of cuss words, but I'm smiling. So there are different things that you can do to control it in the moment. But reality is, once that situation is done, you really have to just think about what your next steps are. How do we get away from here? And decide what you need to do, what's best for you at the end of the day, and make the plan. Sometimes you can't do things immediately, but you start making those plans and get to where you need to go.
Yeah, I love that whole approach of like keeping yourself centered and not allowing anybody to, force you off your game and throw you away from your goals. Like, I think that's so important and such a good point to hold on to. But now, what are your thoughts in terms of how do you remain your composure in the face of those obstacles that people are throwing at you that make no sense, that drive you crazy, but that, emotional intelligence and kind of regulating yourself is critical and is important?
So I think just over time, wisdom and confidence. And I probably have gone through some really difficult times in my career that I could have done so many different kinds of things, but I chose to maintain composure because I really understood and knew who I was and what my performance is and what my teams have thought about what I delivered for them. And I think that's really important. And I think that the other thing that's important is sometimes we are afraid to move and shift. And it is okay to move and shift. And sometimes it happens for you. And then sometimes you make the decision yourself. And what I often think about is, be reasonable, not reasonable, but have expectations that give you happiness. Don't move somewhere because you think you have to. Do it because you want to. At the end of the day, this is what it looks like in corporate America. And it gets bigger at the bottom and the top gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So no matter how good you are, there's going to be a limited amount of space up here. And so you'll have to decide, are you going to be comfortable somewhere here? And if you are, do the very best work you do there and be happy. If you're not, hone your skills and go to the next place where you get to keep on moving up that ladder. But don't quit and stay and be unhappy and all that stuff. That's not going to do what you want it to do. So I just think it's important to have a realistic expectation about the role you're in and the job you're doing and where you expect to be. And then is the company going to be able to do that for you, or are you going to need to move into a newer space to do that, since it does get limiting the higher that you get?
I think that's amazing. Like, I love the concept of centering your happiness, right? And not remaining or staying in places where you're not happy. And then that makes it very difficult to manage your emotional intelligence when you're just not happy or satisfied or not really managing your expectations. Love that. So what are your thoughts?
I'll go really quickly. So I think, and someone said this to me, and I just believe it, and now I feel like I have the right way to say it. Sometimes community service doesn't come wrapped up in a nice organizational name, but it just might be your family. And so you have to give your family what you need, whether they're ill, sometimes it's financial, but sometimes community service is right at home. And after I left Bank of America, that's where I found community service, was right at home. To help take care of my family, because often I have not been there. I was always away. So I think that that's really important, is to find community where you need it. And sometimes it's your family who needs that support and help. You have to know how much to deliver, how much to give, but sometimes that's where community is. And I do have this desire to help people. This campaign, going through the selection process, has opened my eyes in so many ways that I didn't even know. And as I said to you earlier today, it's going back to spaces that you don't remember in terms of how people's lives are affected so much right now. And so I think that for me is my opportunity and my way to give back. Win, lose, or draw, I say I can't unsee what I saw and I can't unhear what I heard. So I'll decide where to best put those efforts. But I think if you have a deep desire and passion to help people, it helps you everywhere, whether it's in your career or whether you decide to try to do something in public service.
Wonderful. I love that concept of community service starts at home sometimes. And I think we see that often within our lives. So beautifully, very well said. So with that, just in closing, you both have just delivered so much wisdom. And I'm so appreciative of being in this space to be able to moderate this conversation. So I wonder, despite all the wonderful things that you have said, if there's even one more thing that you would say in closing, one more piece of advice, wisdom, understanding, insight that you might have for those of us who are listening or navigating or struggling. What would you say as one final kind of closing note? And I don't know who would like to go first. So I don't know if we'll start with, would you like to?
When you know better, do better.
Oh, I love that.
I love that. For me, I'm going to say, this is just what I think. I think giving yourself grace comes before courage. You don't know what you don't know, right? So when you make mistakes, if you did something because you didn't know, you stormed out of the office and now everybody thinks you are angry Black women. So what? So what? There is always another conversation to be had. There's always tomorrow. There's always work to be done. There's always another opportunity. So I'll say give yourself grace, and that comes before the courage.
Yeah, I love that. I love the concept of forgiveness, because I think we often beat ourselves up, whenever we make that mistake, especially since what we just talked about, so much is on the line because we're often that financial lifeline for our family. So we feel the weight of and the burden of any mistake that we make. So thank you for that comment around being graceful and loving and kind to one another. I think that's a great way to end our conversation. Thank you both so much. It was so wonderful. I feel so blessed and honored to have had the opportunity to facilitate. And all I'm going to say before I close it or give it back to April to close, it's just a friendly reminder about the Zoe Rogers and why we're actually doing this series and why it's named after her. We have established a memorial fund in her honor, and we want to continue to keep that tradition going. And so if you feel within your heart that you would like to support the scholarship award or the memorial fund, we just encourage you to either go to the website at Gwynedd Mercy Academy High School or look for more information on CommonBondz and continue to support this effort. But Natalia and Finale, thank you so much. You two were amazing and wonderful. And April, I'm going to just shoot it back to you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Wow, this has been so incredible. I feel like I'm sitting in my living room talking to my sisters, and my my younger sister and my older sister, and we're just talking. And this is so great. I've gotten so much out of this conversation. Natalia, thank you so much. You're my new little sister. I'm not quite sure if I'm older than you, but you look younger, so I'm calling you my little sister.
I'll take it.
And Finale, you're my sister. I told Finale, I said, when I grow up, I want to be like her. And I definitely mean that. She is so phenomenal, with so much grace and so much wisdom. Anita, thank you. You facilitated this so well. I just think you three were just awesome. So thank you so much. So the closing remarks from Finale and Natalia, I wrote down because my grandmother used to say a word to the wise is sufficient. So when you know better, do better. And that's really wise. And then grace comes before courage. I love that. I need to remind myself of that because we're our own worst critic, and I'm so hard on myself. And I just definitely need to incorporate both of these words of wisdom into my life. I feel like we should do a part 2, but maybe next year. Maybe next year, because we have so much lined up. But A lot, everything you've said really is personal to me. I mean, I've been affected by everything you guys were talking about. The mentor and the sponsor. I mean, really, that's how CommonBondz got started. Mike was my sponsor, is my sponsor still. I think had Fleet Credit Card Services not been bought out by Bank of America, he would have been continued to be my sponsor. But I learned a lot from him about business, and he's just an awesome mentor and sponsor. He's both to me. So thank you, ladies, so much for this just extraordinary conversation about what we go through in corporate America, and the words of wisdom that you offered. Really definitely appreciate it.